Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the podcast today, we have Iain Eyre. Iain, welcome.
Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
No problem. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So basically, I'm a health and fitness coach, and I help busy professionals, business owners, executives ward off burnout, really, get in shape and just feel as amazing as they possibly can every day.
So in the approach of making sure that everyone is on the same page, what is your definition of burnout?
So it's quite a big topic, really. But from how I tend to see it from a lot of clients, it tends to manifest in many different ways. There's the physical burnout and the more sort of emotional side of burnout. So typically, people will tend to gravitate towards me when they feel that their body isn't quite performing as they would like it to. Now, this could be a sort of weight loss related, wake up, looking in the mirror one day and kind of going, I don't recognize this person. That's quite typical and quite common. But it could equally be something as commonplace as, I was playing with my kids, or I went to do an activity of some kind, or even just something as mundane as got the shopping in from the car. And you know what? I realized I felt really, really off. Like, it was a struggle, there was a pain, something like that. So that's one side of things. The other side of things is I speak to a lot of people who, especially people who are running their own businesses, who have got very high pressured jobs. And the common theme with those guys tends to be more a case of, I just feel a bit almost, they don't necessarily come to the word burnout immediately, but they feel tired. They feel like they've got no energy. They feel physically tired, but they also feel almost a little bit apathetic about life as well. They've kind of got to a point where if they're a business owner, for example, if they're not at a point in that business where they have the systems and structures in place and they're doing a lot of things themselves, then they typically tend to get that, mini hat syndrome burnout, where they're not necessarily doing the things they really enjoy day to day, but they're just doing the things that they get to sort of steady the ship. So it's very much a hand in hand, physical on one side, emotional, mental on the other side, and it hits people differently in different ways. So depending on their background and what they've been doing in their life really depends on how they kind of come into my world, really. And from there, there's a lot we can kind of go down and sort of investigate and approach, really.
Well, you have mentioned health versus entrepreneurship. I'm not sure you phrased it that particular way, but being a bit of an all or nothing thing. And how would you say you strike a balance in your approach to that?
So I think it really, for me, one big light bulb moment I had in my life was, just like anyone who's building a business, or even if you're creating a product or whatever it be, you'll know that in life, if you're creating something and you want it to get bigger, you have to systemize what you're doing at some point. You have to do that, because if you don't do that, you end up constantly firefighting, trying to provide all of the things around that business or service or product. And for me, it was kind of like, how can we do that with our health and fitness? And it's really about creating those structures and those systems so that you kind of have them as a default system in your life. And that's what I find really makes a difference. And it did for me when I started to look at health and fitness rather than a nice to have or something to work at, but almost as a kind of baseline for your existence. And then everything else can kind of feed off that and go from there. So to give you an idea, if I'm having a really stressful day as a business owner, as well as a coach and everything else, and there's lots of stressful days, then I know that by having exercise, by having good nutrition, by having certain things that in my daily life that I practice at, they help me to reduce the stress, to be able to perform at my peak, and also I think have a clearer head and make better decisions. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of people I speak to struggle with, because they tend to have this, the business is everything, all or nothing approach, and get in there and try and do everything all the time. And it just completely unbalances the rest of their life. And then, as I say, they get to this, it is very common. I see this a lot, this kind of apathetic. I suppose the best way I can describe it is when you start your own business, for example, you go into it with the best of intentions, right? Quite often you're someone who's done a job and then you do it for yourself. But you don't go to business owner school. So, you don't know how to be a business owner. You just know how to be a technician of whatever it was you were before, whether you're in marketing or, if you were working in the gym and then you want to become a personal training business, for example. But you don't actually have the business acumen and necessarily the things to understand how to grow that business. So then you start doing everything. You do the marketing, you do the sales, you do the delivery, you do the admin, you do all of these things. And it's hard, right? It's a big, big struggle. And your main priority in life at that point, because you've put it all out on the line and you've gone, I need to get this thing off the ground, you don't kind of focus on your health and fitness because it's not a priority at that time. But the real downside is that actually, if you do focus on your health and fitness, which seems like you don't have time for it at a time, but if you have it as a foundation and this sort of base layer, it just gives you so much more time and energy. So you can actually start making better decisions and going, maybe I need to employ someone or get a system here, and you can start using that for things across the board. So for me, it's been a game changer. And that's kind of how I try to approach it with clients as well, is try to get them to see that it's not something that takes time. It's actually something that gives time once you get it into your life and you start to integrate it quite quickly.
Well, the nice thing about the two examples you gave about maybe if you're struggling to get the shopping indoors or you're, stressed out or something, is that exercise is proven to help with both those things. So, yeah, I can imagine how both would help in that particular instance. What are some of the the best ways to prevent it from getting to burnout?
That's a great question. I think prevention is always better than cure in any walk of life, but certainly in this instance, because it's really, really hard if you take someone who's extreme, like at the extreme end, the chronic burnout sort of syndrome. At that point, it could be manifesting in as much as, you could have serious chronic illness or disease. That's how far down the line you may have got. And if that's the case, obviously you're going to probably have more money issues as well as worries, as well as all the stress from the burnout itself. And trying to cure that at that point is a long road to recovery, really. And it's something that people don't always come back from successfully. So if you can prevent it, which you always can, then that's a much, much better option. And I think some of the key things to have in life here really are, there's things that seem to be a lot more popular and bandied about these days, but things like meditation, mindfulness, the term well-being, I think is a term that, a lot of people are a bit more au fait with now these days. And for me, well-being really is, do you have the competency to put yourself at ease? That's really how you can start to look after yourself. Because when we're children and we're babies, obviously we can't self-soothe. We rely on parents to make it all better. And then ideally, as an adult, when you become an adult, you should be able to self-soothe. But not everyone has actually managed that. And so what you find is, and you can find some really, really uber successful people in the world who still have tantrums and actually can't self-soothe, which is, it sounds crazy, but it's completely true. And part of the sort of meditation practice, things like yoga, breathing techniques, all these really are just allowing you, the user and the practitioner of them, to kind of bring your body back to homeostasis and actually self-soothe. And basically, on some level, tell yourself that whatever's happening around you, you're okay. So I would always recommend to anyone to start investigating things. If you're kind of thinking about how can you prevent stress and burnout and sort of reduce it and keep it at a minimum, breathing techniques are fantastic. They cost no money. You can do them pretty much anywhere. And, you can download demos on you can look at YouTube, you can go on Even on my podcast, I've done them before and things like that. And they're just, the resources are everywhere basically, but it's just a case of, getting started. And if you can start to control how you feel, you can start to understand that if you do start to get out of control and you do feel stressed, you can bring it back down to that baseline again. So that's something that I'd always recommend. Another one is obviously exercise. Now, there's massive, massive benefits to exercise. And depending on what sort of types you do, the benefits will vary. But one of the biggest things about exercise as a benefit is that it just makes you feel better. The endorphins that get released into your body, oxytocin, all these things that happen, the chemicals that come out from your brain, make you feel physically better and emotionally better. On top of that, it's a great stress reliever. If you go for a run, even if you go for a walk, or if you go and do some weights, or some of the things I've got here in the background, for example, you might go into that workout with the most stressed situation. But throughout that workout, you will physically feel better. Your shoulders will lower away from your ears. Your body will relax as you expel that energy. And then you start to come back again to homeostasis. So really, anything that allows you to calm your nervous system and feel at ease is always going to be a good way of preventing getting to burnout.
Yeah. I love the point about the super successful person having a tantrum. I've not heard that before. That's brilliant.
I've met quite a few.
Well, I think correct me if I'm wrong, one of the main things that people in the health, fitness, what should we say, profession, what they struggle with is the concept of people who say, I know I should do it, quote unquote, but I don't for whatever reason. What are your thoughts around that particular, I don't know if you'd call it an objection necessarily, but what are your thoughts around that topic?
So in terms of the word should itself, I really, dislike the word should, purely because for me, it's a shame-ridden word. If you think back to childhood, for example, and a teacher or a parent will say, you should do this, and it's something you didn't want to do. It will be, you should tidy your room, or you should put the books away after class, or you should not run in the corridor. All of these sort of shoulds. Okay. Now they may be right. Maybe we shouldn't have done those things, if you like to use that word, but the idea of should shames people. It just has that shamey feel to it. So instead, when people say that, I say, well, you know what? It's a choice, right? You could exercise, you could eat better, you could, spend more time on relaxation and feel better. And if you know intuitively that these things would make you feel better, but you choose not to do them, no one can make you do them. But I would always suggest just trying it, even in the small, short term, just doing a little bit, even if it's once for one day and then doing it again the next day and repeating. Because what often happens is quite often people will get to that point where if it's a should, unfortunately, it won't be something that they change. But if it's a could and then it becomes a must, that's when you see the change in people. And a must only really happens when either someone is facing a existential crisis of some kind and they must change, they have to, because there's going to be a huge result either way, good or bad, if they don't. Or they kind of simply have enough. They've had enough of what's happened before and they don't want to repeat it again. Now, to get to that, quite often you have to see at least the benefits of doing something. So it's not always as cut as dry as people sort of going, I either do exercise or I don't, or I eat healthily or I don't. There's lots of people who are kind of in between the two. They do it sometimes and they don't do it others. And really it's a case of consistency. The more you do it, the better the results, the better you feel, the more you realize this isn't just a fad, this isn't a tool, this isn't something that I can pick up and do for 6 weeks and then leave it again. If I actually have this in my life on a daily basis, and let's face it, we all have time. It's 24 hours in every single day. And whenever I speak to anyone and say, what have you been doing recently, especially in lockdown? Well, I've watched this box set and I've done this and I've, all of these things. You go, well, okay, cool. I mean, you could put a TV up in front of a rowing machine, or a runner, or you could listen to a podcast when you're going out for a walk or a jog or whatever. So there's always time. So that's never really an excuse. It's more a case of just understanding that at some point in your life, probably when you were a child, if you can't remember it as an adult, and if not, certainly as an adult, there was a time in your life when you felt great, when you really, really did feel good. You had energy, boundless energy all day long, and you lived to play. And things that like running around and jumping around, they were just things that you did because you were excited and you could do it and it didn't hurt and it was all great. Imagine what it would be like to feel that again, to feel that kind of excitement where you get out of bed in the morning, you literally jump out of bed, you're ready to go, and everything just feels good. And that's what it's all about, is getting back to that sort of stage of life. As I say, some people don't remember that because they haven't had it since they were a child. Other people, may have had it in their early sort of late teens, early adulthood, and maybe want to rekindle that. But if it's a should, it's not going to happen. It's got to become a must, is my take on that one.
What are your thoughts on if someone is about to approach the time where it is actually a must? What should they look out for?
I think at that moment in time, when it becomes a must for you, as with most things in life, the things will suddenly appear. You will get the right things in the right order. So, for example, there's lots of people I've worked with in the past that have this is a very common scenario. They'll say, I want to achieve X, which normally translates to, I just want to feel better. Okay. And a byproduct of that will be looking better and performing better and everything else that comes along with it. And I'll say, okay, cool. Well, what have you tried before? And a very, very, very common answer is, I've tried X diet. I've tried this kind of exercise. I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. Right. Okay. Are you doing it now? No. Why not? Well, the exercise got boring, or didn't like the food, or it wasn't sustainable. And there's all these reasons why we don't do it. And the bottom line is because it's that word there, sustainability. You can't keep doing it unless it's sustainable. So you have to enjoy it on some level. And when people get to that point where it's a must, they will do it. They actually break through that sort of level of, I must enjoy it. And they actually just do it. They start to just do it. For example, I've seen people who swore blind for years they would never run. And they get to a point in their life where they must get fit, they must get healthy, they must do whatever. And the first thing they turn to, because the only thing they know intrinsically how to do when it comes to exercise or fitness or sport, is to run. And it might be really awful to watch, and it might be really awful for them to feel it. But within a year or 2 years, then all of a sudden they're running marathons, because it went from a must and they found the way and they pushed through, and they did like the apps like Couch to 5K, for example, and then so on. And they've built from there and carried on. And when you get that must inside you, it's like, building a business. If you're an employee and you don't like being an employee, but you kind of accept it for years, and it's a should. I should do this for myself. My wife keeps telling me I should do it for myself. My friends say you should do it for yourself, but it's a should, so you never do it. But then one day you've had enough. You've had enough, and it becomes a must. And you're like, I will not do this anymore. And you don't know how to set up a business necessarily. You don't know the right channels or the best way of doing it. I think that's the important part here. You don't know the best way of doing it, but you get started anyway because it's a must. So for anyone who's at that point where they're like, I've had enough and this is a must now and I need to crack on and get moving, just start with anything. Just start with the basics. How does your body want to move? It's probably very, very ingrained in your movement patterns to walk. So in which case you can jog. If you can jog, you can run. And if you can't run yet, go back to a jog, go back to a walk. Just start doing something. When things are opening up again now, swimming. If you like swimming and you can swim, it's a fantastic exercise because you don't put any excess pressure on your joints. And you can just go at your own pace. Even walking in the swimming pool, is a great resistance exercise. So anyone who's at that point of, it's a must, I'm going to do this. My role in that, when I help people in that situation, is I act as a guide and a mentor and a coach to get them to somewhere where they're already going to get to, but we just cut down the time. Because that's the biggest thing. When someone has decided they will change, they now need to know, how do I get there as quickly as possible? And that's where people like me can help.
Well, coming on to that topic, I'm interested to know how much of what you do is about accountability and how much is about the technical how-to stuff.
So accountability is huge. It's absolutely huge. I'd say that five, maybe even 10 years ago, in the world of sort of personal training, for example, it was very much a case of people went to a personal trainer because they didn't have the know-how, the ability, and the availability of all the information that you do now. So, if you wanted to know how to look a certain way or act a certain way or perform in a sport, a personal trainer would be a great option for you because, the internet wasn't as great as it is now and the magazines weren't as great and all that sort of stuff. But now, you can go on YouTube. You can go on YouTube and look for anything, and you will find every single exercise with a tutorial and someone showing you how to do it. The downside is you're also going to find a million other videos showing you how to do it differently. And so you do have this massive, cross section of different opinions and ideas. So the idea of actually knowing how to do it doesn't really stack up so much. My role really is to act as that accountability level for people who would otherwise struggle to do it for themselves. So I've got many clients who would openly admit that for them, they would happily do the exercise. They would happily eat well. But having someone to answer to each week in terms of their own accountability and say, this is what I did and this is why I did it, makes them so much sharper about it, and it keeps them on track. I've got other clients who have no idea how to exercise and work out, and certainly not safely. And so they need that guidance, certainly initially, to get going. And then it becomes much more about the accountability. And I think the last piece really is the coaching part. So the big thing for a lot of people is that, generally speaking, I don't work with people who are perfectly fine doing what they're doing by themselves. They've got a great idea what they're doing, and they genuinely keep themselves fit day to day and everything like that, because they don't really need that extra motivation and they don't really need that extra accountability. But when you're someone who either this is completely new to, you've never really set foot in this world before, or for example, a client I worked with last year throughout lockdown, he'd literally never, ever, ever set foot in a gym. He'd never done anything that you could categorize as sport. So when it comes to moving his body, he was very, very alien at it outside of the usual day-to-day functions. So for example, to do like a squat or a lunge or something like that are kind of movements that you would transfer into any sport, they were really uncomfortable for him. They were alien to him. He had to work on his balance, his strength, all sorts of areas just to do these movement patterns. So for him, he needed a lot of the basic stuff, and then the support and accountability on top of it. The other thing he needed, and a lot of people need, is the coaching mindset, to be able to say, this is tough, right? This is new. There's all these new skills and all these new things, but don't worry, you've got this. We're going to build this bit by bit, week by week. It's kind of like those things you get from on TV where it says, build your own Millennium Falcon week by week by getting this part and then this part and then this part. And it's kind of like that. If you give the whole Millennium Falcon to someone and say, right, there you go, it's going to take 2 weeks to build, off you pop. Most people go, whoa, I don't have the time. I can't get my head around this. I don't know how this works. But if you give them a bit week by week by week by week and they build it up, by the end of the period, they now have this amazing prize that they've earned. They've got the self-esteem for earning it, and they've been accountable the whole time. And they start to become more accountable to themselves. So I'd say accountability is a key part of what I do, for sure.
Yeah, asking the question, I might have been looking at it through my own lens a little bit there. I'm sure it's a mix of people that you have to work with. But
absolutely.
Yeah. In order to get people a bit more emotionally engaged with the concept of preventing burnout, would you like to share your story a little bit, because you have a, should we say, unique perspective on that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, it's there's a reason why I not only do what I do, but also with the people that I help, and that's because my background was very much in business for myself. I set up in business probably 24 years old. Went from recruitment from an agency straight into working for myself with my partner. And we set up a very successful business. It got busy really, really quickly. And life was good. Was doing very, very well. Was earning a hell of a lot of money at a very young age. And, everything was fantastic, except it wasn't. And I didn't really recognize it at the time. But at the time, it was all about work hard, play hard. And because it was our thing, we were building it up. It was client entertaining after work. I mean, work started at 7 o'clock every morning, didn't finish till at least 7 o'clock, but most nights it was maybe 8, 9 o'clock because we were doing everything. Then we were going out for drinks, either with the people we're working with or with clients. Come to the weekend, same thing again, entertaining other people, entertaining clients. And life was just, it was going by really, really, really quickly. And within a couple of years, had a son, and I was getting really, really, really unhealthy. And I didn't quite realize how bad it was actually getting. I mean, I kind of had warning signs a few times. I mean, I smoked quite heavily at the time. But I was drinking most nights because I thought at the time, because I was kind of enjoying myself. When I look back, it was more of a stress reliever. It was more of a, I've had a long day, unwind. But then every day that alcohol would kind of come in earlier and earlier. So, it was like 6 o'clock, first glass of wine or a beer or whatever. We were still in the office, still making calls, crack open a beer, that kind of thing. And the pressure and the stress was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that was when things were really, really good. So if we had a slight downtime as well, or the pressure was on, it got even worse. And I didn't do any exercise. I didn't do any kind of recovery or anything like that. I just kept going full steam. And I think there was a period of about probably 6 months to a year where I was probably ill pretty much every month. Every single month I had some kind of illness on it. Not necessarily long, but it could be like a cold or flu was going around. And all of a sudden, I'd get it really bad and it would wipe me out for a couple of days. It'd still be working, but, make me feel really, really bad. So it was quite common. And my wife kind of got used to me feeling a bit rough and coming in with a hangover and all that sort of stuff. And then one day, it got really, really bad. I'd been out the night before. I wasn't feeling great anyway. And I remember saying to my wife, I said, I can't go to work. She was like, what do you mean? Like, I can't go to work. I feel awful. And she was, by this point, she'd had enough. She was like, typical, It's like, no, seriously, I feel really bad. So I kind of crawled back to bed. I'd made an attempt to get up and get washed, and it just wasn't happening. Get back into bed. And I just felt awful. And I remember just passing out. And then all I remember really happening was kind of just waking up in sort of fits of sweats and heart palpitations and all kinds of things going on. And then next thing I know, I'd been sick. I don't remember doing it. I must have woken up, been sick. And this kind of went on for a few hours, and then it got to sort of early evening and it was dark, and my wife had called the doctor because I just didn't really look good at all. I had a really high temperature and I couldn't get out of bed, and I just kept passing out. So the doctor had come around and basically said, yeah, he needs to go to hospital now. We're going to get him an ambulance. So I got an ambulance, went to hospital, and I remember the same thing. I was just kind of being wheeled along in a chair towards a ward, and I just kept passing in and out of consciousness. I got sick, and the last thing I remember that evening was basically a doctor saying, "We're going to anaesthetize you because we're going to perform an emergency operation. We think your appendix has burst and we need to get you under the knife as soon as possible." So I was like, oh, wow, okay. So count back from 5. I was like, 5, gone. And that was that. So I woke up in Whipps Cross Hospital the next day. I'd probably been awake before that, but I think my body probably just needed the rest more than anything else. It just needed to actually just completely rest. So I was out for quite some time, and I came round and I was in this ward. And I remember sort of like the sun coming through the window and thinking, what has happened to me? I feel like I've been in a car crash. On one hand, I feel better than I did yesterday. On the other hand, I feel 10 times worse. And doctors came around and did their rounds, and they sat down and said, right, really good news was the operation was completely successful. We removed your appendix. There was no problem whatsoever. I was like, okay, cool. I said, problem was, though, there was no issue at all with your appendix. I was like, what do you mean? I said, well, by the time we got it out and removed it, inspecting the appendix, there was nothing wrong with it. We suspected that it had burst and that's what had happened and that's what's causing you the problems. So what was it then? Basically, it looks like it's a massive, severe form of toxic shock. It's too much stress, too much hedonistic lifestyle. Your body's just had enough. So I was like, whoa. I think I was 26 at the time when this happened. And I was like, I just couldn't believe it. I actually could not believe it. The doctor said, you need to change. You need to change now if you want to see, later on in life. So my wife came with my young son at that time, a couple of hours later, and they came in visiting time. And I turned what I always knew was a should up in that point of I should start to look after myself. I should start to make more time for me and my family. I should start to stop drinking as much alcohol, all these things. And it became a must. It became an absolute must. I've been thinking about quitting and I should quit cigarettes and all those things. It was done. So I was in hospital for the best part of 2 weeks because it was one of the worst things about it was they had to dig really deep to get my appendix. So I've got a big old scar on my stomach there. And when I came out, after a few weeks from there, I was able to start moving around again. And I just said, that's it. Enough is enough. I'm not going to do this anymore. So I quit smoking cold turkey, cut down the alcohol massively, and eventually just, I barely drink now these days at all, occasionally on a sort of birthday or celebration. And I just bit by bit started to figure out this fitness exercise malarkey and how to eat better and look after myself. And in doing that, that's when I really realized that it didn't matter if I did that, if I still kept trying to do everything in my business on my own, if I kept trying to run everything and manage everything and do everything. And that's when I kind of said, you know what, enough's enough. I'm not going to do that. And I started to delegate, started to hand over, started to automate things, put systems in place. And that's what I started to do with my health and fitness too. So then eventually I came to the point where my wife actually runs that business. I have nothing to do with it anymore. I've completely come away from it and built up my coaching business. And that's what I focus on. And again, I've taken those same principles into that business. And, the idea of automation, elimination, and delegation for tasks that I shouldn't be doing, I use in my day-to-day life as well as my business life. So that's why I not only help people with their health and fitness and trying to avoid that burnout situation, but specifically business owners and people who are in high stress level jobs, because the other thing that happened to me at an early age was I was a child of divorce. And the reason I was because similarly, my dad was in a very high up position in the company and we rarely saw him. And again, high pressure, quite a lot of alcohol, late nights, early mornings, all of those things. So, I've seen the damage it can do to people. I've seen the effect it can have on a family. I mean, I'm lucky to have the support of my family here today. It could have been very, very different. So, it's for me, it's not just something I enjoy doing or, a nice to have. It really is something that I get so much pleasure out of helping people to change, and not just change their bodies and their minds, but change the course of the direction of their lives as well. So it's a big one for me.
Well, thank you for sharing the story. It is it's a serious one. I mean, a couple of questions to follow up on. The first, a minor one, when you quit smoking cold turkey, what was that like?
So I had, again, this very much comes back to the should. I had shoulded it. So I'd should all over myself so many times before, where I'd gone, I should quit smoking, and I'd tried gum and I'd tried all these sorts of things. When it became a must, it was just, I'm not going to say it was easy, but it was a simple decision. It was literally, decided to not do it anymore. So I didn't buy them. I threw any kind of paraphernalia away. I had horrible withdrawal symptoms. for like, after about 3 days of not having it, I was kind of thinking, oh, this is not too bad. Then bam, I got hit with like a sort of flu situation, and all these things, toxins coming out of my body that had been in there for years. And, I felt really, really awful. By the time I got to the end of the first month, I felt fantastic. I could breathe again. I could smell things again. I could taste food properly. I was like, this is amazing. But it literally took me having that must in my head, and looking at my son and looking at my family situation and going, this is not worth this. I'm just, I'm not doing this anymore. And to be fair, I even cut out seeing certain people that I knew that if I saw them, it would be in the pub. At the time, you could smoke in the pub with a cigarette and a beer. So
controlling your environment.
100%. Who I spent time with, where I spent time was massive. And it's very similar with the health and fitness journey as well. People struggle when they try and do it if they're surrounded by people who aren't aligned to that journey. That's why it's quite important sometimes to have someone like a coach or someone you can lean on who understands you going through that, but also is going to give you that support. And I found, for me, I needed to isolate myself quite a bit until I was sure that it was out of my system and I wasn't going to do it anymore. But if you don't have that ability to do that, if you're going to work, for example, every day, then you've got to try and limit that environment as much as you can, or the people that you spend time with as much as you can, until you know that you're beyond it. But yeah, it wasn't easy, not at all.
And now, given your expertise, do you look back on your story and think, there's a major contributor, or do you think, it's just a combination of all those things which put me in that position?
It's a great question. I think there's a few things key that when I look back on my earlier years and my young years that made a massive difference and influence in getting to that point. So, for example, seeing or not seeing as much of my dad when I was growing up meant that my experience, my memories of him, he was a smoker. He was quite a heavy drinker at the time, and he would work all the hours God sends. So there's that kind of role model effectively that was there subconsciously. And I'm certainly not passing blame, but I think that was an element of that. Secondly, because it was a divorce situation as I was becoming a teenager, my mum was working a few different jobs, which meant that she wasn't around as much, which meant that after school, I was hanging around with people who were also not going back to a family environment. So smoking, alcohol was quite a commonplace thing. So that is, again, two kind of examples really of how important environment really, really, really is. And then I think once those foundations were laid, just like exercise now and eating healthily and relaxation and recovery is a part of my day-to-day routine, at some point in my life, smoking and drinking was a daily part of my routine, or certainly a weekly part on the alcohol side anyway. And I think it's consistency. Any habit, good or bad, gets formed just by how much you do it. And if you're in an environment where it's the norm and it's accepted to do certain things, you'll do them. On a long enough timeline, you'll do them. And it's the same on the other side as well. If you go to a gym and you're reluctant to work out by yourself, for example, but you go to a gym and you've got the buzz of everyone else around you doing it, and you realize you kind of get over that fear factor that people aren't actually watching you and don't care what you're doing, eventually you start to actually do it. And then the more you do it, the more it becomes a habit and more ingrained. So I think definitely environment had a big part to play with it. Stress massively had a big part to play with it, because before I was really going for it hell for leather in the work world, I wasn't as stressed, and actually I'd kind of cut some of those things back quite a bit. So I was still smoking, that was a habit, I had that. I wasn't drinking as much, I didn't have as many late nights and things like that. So the stress and the part of the environment, because it was very much a work hard, play hard, balls to the wall kind of environment. You've got to put it out there and leave nothing behind. So again, environment, stress massively contributes to it. And on some level as well, again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying about when you become a business owner, you don't have a business owner's manual. I'd become a dad. My my understanding of what a dad was, I didn't really have one. So I had a lot of stress, I guess, that I didn't even really acknowledge at the time, which was, what if I mess this up? What if this all goes wrong? What if I don't become the person that he needs me to be? And I think on some level that contributed to it. So yeah, I think a few different things, all equally as important. And once you kind of realize in your life that actually you can choose your outcome and you can decide which way you want to go, that holds a lot of power as well. Because I think there was a little bit, an element of, in my younger years, kind of saying, oh, well, whatever happens, happens, because I'm not in control. Probably from a psychiatrist's point of view, stemming back from, childhood divorce, out of control, I couldn't control the outcome, and so on and so forth. So yeah, there's a bit of immaturity in there as well.
It sounds like you've done a lot of self-reflection on it anyway.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, it's something that I didn't ever expect to do or even set out to do. But over the last sort of 10 years of my life, as part of becoming a coach, not just in terms of health and fitness, but actually a life coach, and being able to help other people with their issues, you do a lot of self-reflection, and you do help people reflect on their situations, and you realize there's a lot of commonalities, and that people's problems quite often stem from the same things again and again and again. And as I say, looking back, I can see a lot of issues that, had things been different, probably wouldn't have led to that situation. However, leading to that situation, the positive side of it is it gave me that window to what could be, and making that change. And who knows, if that hadn't happened, maybe my life would have gone in a very, very different direction, and maybe we wouldn't be talking today. So I always look at the positive side of it and try and take that into my life now. And my youngest my eldest, who was little then, is 17 this year.
Wow.
And yeah, absolutely. So I've just tried to really focus on making sure that he sees that health and fitness isn't I need to do it, but it's something that enhances your life. And I've never pushed him into doing it. I've never pushed him into sports or anything like that. And for quite some years, both myself and my wife were a little bit concerned, thinking maybe we should have pushed him. He doesn't really do much. But over the last couple of years, he's naturally gravitated now towards doing sports, doing activities. He'll come into the gym environment and do things off his own back, because he's just seen and felt the benefits of it. He doesn't smoke, he doesn't drink, he doesn't hang around with many people who do. So he's in a better situation. I think that's the other thing. Sometimes you can be a positive role model, even just doing what you consider to be normal,
Yeah, they don't listen to what you say, they notice what you do, something like that.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm, I wasn't sure if I ever really believed that in years gone by, but over the last couple of years, I've seen that more and more. Don't tell them what to do; they won't do it. just have some kind of positivity, and some influence on them that will last. Because ultimately, you can't control the behavior, but you can at least control the environment, so that they grow up in a decent environment and actually understand what values and what things are important. So.
Just touching on one thing, because I thought that you went from a recruitment job into the business you're doing now, but it was a different business, was it?
No. So it was from recruitment into this. Yeah, correct.
Okay. And what was that process like? Were you able to get some clients doing your coaching before you left your job?
No, not really. So I kind of decided that when I was going to make a break, it was going to be a very clean break, and leave it behind, for two reasons, really. One, because I wanted to kind of prove to myself that this wasn't going to just be, although I really enjoyed it and really loved and saw the benefit of living a healthy lifestyle at this point, I wanted to make sure it wasn't just something that I was going to do and it wasn't going to go anywhere, and I was going to let people down. So I wanted to prove it to myself that this was something that was going to stick as a career rather than just a hobby, should we say. So I took the not so easy way out of doing this, right? I made it hard for myself. I went and actually did my qualifications. surrounded by 17 and 18-year-olds. And I wasn't anywhere near as young as them. And then I went and got a job in a gym, and I worked in a gym, and I just did it just to see if I could help people, see if it worked, see what I needed to do. I'd been in gyms for quite a few years at this point. I've been used to them, used to the environments, but I was like, now I'm on the other side of it. How does this actually work? And I learned so much, but I was always kind of the outsider because, I wasn't this sort of 17, 18-year-old coming into the industry, and this was my sort of first job. So I had a lot of life experience as well as business experience. And this was kind of now my passion as well. And at that point, once I got a bit more experience, then I kind of reached out to some people that I'd worked with previously and I'd been in the previous industry with. And then I felt kind of like, I validated this. I actually can help other people. I do get some great results here. It's not just for me. And I'd like to help more people now. And that's when I kind of went, right, this is a legitimate business. It isn't just me trying to go on some holy crusade and convert people into getting healthier and fitter every day. There are some genuine problems that need to be addressed. And if we address them properly, you can make that change for life. So yeah, it was an interesting transition, so we say.
What's the story of how you got your first client?
Well, very, very simply, my first client was I would count in the gym. And that's it's an interesting place because the gym is kind of like a nightclub when you actually work there. In as much as you're kind of on the prowl for clients. And I remember when I first got there and we did the induction and they were saying, right, okay, so this is kind of like typically what you can do and what you can't do, how to approach people, how not to approach people. Now, I'd come from a world previously where I was used to ringing people up and I was used to seeing them face to face, and it was all very much on a kind of equal footing and all this sort of stuff. Now I was kind of like lurking in a gym and approaching people when they're in their sort of skimpy gym gear and stuff. And it was really alien. It was like, this is weird. This is just so weird. So I hung back a little bit and just watched other instructors and other people and sort of saw how it kind of went down, really. And then I realized, actually, what I really need to do is just demonstrate that I know what I'm talking about. So I just kind of like helped a couple of people with some things. I did a little impromptu sort of class in the middle of the gym one day, and people just started coming towards me. So my first client was quite easy to get because it was just someone who just needed to get ready for their holiday and they wanted to look better and feel better. And I was like, this is perfect because it's like great training ground material. I can help them without any kind of like real severe, anything going wrong. If I don't get it right, they're not going to die of something. They're just not going to be as great looking in their bikini. But we got a great result and it was fantastic. And from that point on, I think that's when I really sort of made the decision as well. I didn't want to be a personal trainer in a gym. There's nothing wrong with personal trainers, and anyone who's listening, there is one, you do a fantastic job. I know I've done it. But being a personal trainer, you are there to help someone get ready for an event, which is usually a wedding or a health-based event, or I want to go and look good on the beach or whatever. And the problem with that mindset is that when people have that getting ready for an event mindset, is that they don't adopt the change for life. They just think for 12 weeks or however long, I need to do X. But as soon as that finishes, I can't wait to go back to how I used to be. And that's, something that I identified earlier on, that if you really want to work with behavioral change with people, you need to understand the mechanisms behind that, which is when I started looking into coaching as a mechanism and NLP as well. And it was a case of, helping people long term isn't personal training. It's very, very different. And that's when I kind of said, I need to study more. I need to branch out more and get more learning before I can really help people make that fundamental change.
What was it like when you left the gym?
It was scary at first because the gym is, I'm not going to name names of which gym it was, but it was a very big, popular central London based chain. And the gym itself is a great place. That the particular environment I was in was a really, really good environment. The only downside of it was that if you started to get clients there, because it was in central London, basically you were pretty much freelance from day one anyway. You weren't employed by the gym. You were self-employed, and therefore you could kind of charge within their guidelines whatever your rates needed to be. But you would have to pay a rent back to the gym every month to be there. And to do that, to achieve that rent, you had to get off the ground quite quickly. So I think, for example, 3 clients would probably cover your rent for the month. If you got 3 clients quite quickly, that, you wouldn't really be taking home too much more than that, but you'd be covering your rent. So it was quite expensive. But once you kind of broken past that sort of rental issue, you could start stacking up people quite quickly. The downside was that you were then tied to that gym. So what I saw was a lot of people who'd been at that gym working there as PTs for 3, 4, 5 years even, and they couldn't leave because they'd built up this clientele that were there, and they realized that they were part and parcel of that gym now. They literally couldn't go out anywhere else and do what they needed to do. So after about probably 6 months, I kind of already earmarked that I wasn't going to stay there long term. So I was ready to move when I was ready to move. But then when I actually did it, it was quite scary because it was like, now I don't have people approaching me. They're not coming to me and saying, "Hey, can you help me? I saw you helping that person," or and I was unknown at this point now. I was very well known in the gym. Now I'm completely unknown. So I had to, marketing, right? If you don't know what you're doing, well, what do you do? So marketing, the admin side, everything, all of a sudden I had to pull these operations together to get a new business completely off the ground. And I'd kind of been out of being in business for a while and just kind of enjoyed being self-employed for a while, which was a very different experience because all I needed to work on was programming, looking after people, studying, and handing over the finances to an accountant. So it was a little bit easier on the sort of stress levels. And then all of a sudden I jumped back into the business world again. It was like, oh no, I forgot all this. Forgot all the stress. But it was a good stress. And as I say, I learned from my experiences. So it was good when it happened.
What was day one like when you left the gym? You're in your new venture. What does day one look like for you?
Excitement, real excitement, because for the first time in a long time, so when I first got into recruitment, it was purely natural progression of I did a sort of customer-based role. Part of that role was sales. So I kind of went, actually, I kind of prefer the sales side. So then I progressed into a different role, which was a pure sales role. Liked the customer sales element of it, but didn't like the products of what I was selling. It was IT stuff at the time and didn't really enjoy the chain that was involved. So then my friend said to me, have you thought about recruitment? I've never really thought of it at all. So then I ended up going for an interview with recruitment and I actually said no initially. And then they came back to me about 6 months later and said, look, we're still looking for people. Would you be interested in coming back in again? Went back in at this point. I thought, actually, you know what? I'll give it a go. And it just clicked and I loved it. And the thing I really, really loved about it was I used to think at the time it was the sales, it was the money, it was the environment. It wasn't. It was actually the people. It was helping people to progress and get to that next level. And that's what I really, really enjoyed. And that's what I hadn't got out of the IT sales job, for example. So for me, going into recruitment was never something that I chose to do. It just kind of naturally happened. So when I set up for myself in terms of the fitness side, it was something I'd chosen to do. I'd studied, I had a passion for it. It was something that helped me in my life personally. So this was a really exciting day one. This was like, I can't wait to help people and I can't wait to get people to change. And it was great. It was, brimming with excitement. And then big disappointment afterwards because it wasn't quite as easy as I hoped it would be initially. Getting people through the door initially was tough because I totally underestimated where I'd been in the gym, and literally people were coming to me. I'd completely underestimated how saturated the sort of health and fitness market was. So, what I would have done now in hindsight, looking back, there was so many things I would have done differently. And at the time, I didn't really know what I was doing. So it was kind of it was a big steep learning curve, but an exciting one.
We got any generalized tips for people, not necessarily PTs, but principles that someone can learn if they're in that position? They've just started up and they've hit that kind of, oh, I need to go find people moment.
Yeah, I think so. For me, what was really useful was having that background in a sales-based environment where I was used to effectively, cold calling and doing things like that. So I didn't start picking up a yellow pages and calling people randomly and saying, "Are you overweight or are you out of shape?" Because I think that's a little bit rude. But no, what I did was I took that mentality of what was it that worked back then. And what worked back then was having, KPIs, key performance indicators, and having systems and numbers and data in place so that you know what you're likely to get out of each day and each week. And I forgot that at first because I'd been out of it for quite some time at this point. I kind of just completely disregarded it, and I started trying to just kind of like randomly, I'm on Facebook, I'll speak to someone. Randomly on LinkedIn, or someone's called me. And everything was very much reactive until I kind of sat down and went, actually, I need to form a plan here. So I need to, if I want to work out how many people it takes me to get to a client, I can work that backwards. So, was it maybe I needed to speak to 30 people, whether it's on the phone or via email or whatever the number was. How then do I get that many leads? Right. Okay. Well, then I get that many leads from Facebook or through friends of friends or emails or whatever. So I need to get 100 leads to speak to 30 people. If I speak to 30 people, I convert one, which is a terrible conversion rate, but it's just an example. And that's what I did. And I started to just work it backwards and say, okay, so what do I need to do each day? And that sort of formed the basis of that activity. And once I had started to use that and get that process underway again, then I started to quickly, have confidence that my week wasn't a waste of a week if I didn't get any new clients that week, because I knew that I was closer to those numbers and I'd get them the next week. And sure enough, that's pretty much what happened. Once I had a couple of people under my belt and I was training them regularly, and obviously I could start to get referrals at that point. And that was a really important part for my business, was to get word of mouth. And everyone was always happy to refer based on the results they got, which was fantastic. And then really it was a case of saying, okay, who has done this before me? Who's done this better? And looking at people who were further ahead on my journey. So, there were people in the industry who had already been doing what I was doing. And I liked the kind of ideas of what they were doing as well. So it's hard to kind of emulate a PT if you're doing PT, because you just kind of look at what they're doing in the gym and you can emulate that. That's fine. But when you're outside of that, I wasn't creating a gym, so I didn't want to copy a gym format. I wasn't creating a PT studio, so I didn't have that. I kind of emulated some of the business coaches and some of the fitness sort of influencers, and I kind of put a little bit of both together because I found that worked really, really well for what I was doing. So my best advice really would be, number one, put some kind of framework in place where you can work out how many contact points you need to get to a client, and you can work that backwards. And then secondly, have people in front of you that you can look up to, people who've done this already and done it successfully, whether that's in your industry or a nearby industry or shoulder industry, just to give you A, the confidence that it can be done, and B, some kind of roadmap ahead to get there as well.
Great advice. Thank you for sharing your story today and all the principles that you shared.
No, you're welcome. Hopefully that will help some people.
I'm sure it will. Iain Eyre, where is the best place for people to find you?
So best place really, I think if you're someone who's kind of talking about the topic of burnout, for example, if you go to function.fitness/burnout, then there's actually a free download there, which is an ebook of some tips and advice you can start to put into your life today. So if that's something that's of interest for you, and you're sort of thinking about how can I make these things a reality, that would be a great place to start.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your time, and I'll speak to you soon.
Will do. Thanks for having me on the show.